Welcome to another episode of the Middle West Podcast. I'm your host, Taqib Musa, and what I'm supposed to say is welcome to another fresh concoction of extremely oversalted rice and aggressive eyebrow movements in your host, Taqib Musa. I'm not sure I have to say this.
I'm supposed to be I'm.
No, you're not meant to say that.
Oh, right, okay. So we're obviously trying out our intros, different versions, but I'm joined today by my co-host, Asad Hussein.
Assalamu alaikum.
And our guest co-host for the first time, Mustafa Dabagh. So, episode 2 was your first episode on the podcast where you were a guest.
Very good episode. Have a listen to it.
Yeah,
it was.
And we're joined
because I was in it.
We're joined today by Craig Pinkney in studio. This is our first episode with video that we're going to release.
Oh, wicked.
So we decided that you were the right guest to do it because I think I only have a face for radio. But with you we can bring video on as well. So Craig is a criminologist, urban youth worker. And I was looking at your CV and I was like, there's some very cool things like gang exit strategies, and things like that. You've authored papers on kind of gang culture within Muslim groups, black Muslims, things like that. So very interesting. And today we're here to talk about all things knife crime, gang crime, that kind of thing, and get a little bit of your expertise on it. Mm-hmm. So really appreciate you joining us. Yeah. You're also a lecturer at City University, Birmingham?
Yeah, I used to be a lecturer. I literally left a few weeks ago.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so I've started my own company called Solve, which is the Centre of Youth Violence and Conflict.
Okay.
That's interesting.
Very nice.
Did you lecture in criminology? Or
Yes, I lecture in criminology and criminal justice, youth work, offender management, professional development, so anything to do with youth work skills and developing skills of youth work, and anyone that was interested in criminology or criminal justice or offender management type of. Of course. And I also used to run a program called Responding to Gangs and Serious Youth Violence, which was a partnership with a community organisation that we rolled out across the country.
Okay, very nice. So I guess I wanted to go right back to the start of it.
Yes.
From how you got involved, because I think your bachelor's was something related to this.
Youth work was my first degree.
And how did you get into, or what inspired you to go down youth work?
It was weird. It wasn't one particular reason. It was a number of reasons. So my earlier background kind of starts with my grandparents. My grandparents were well known in the early 60s and 70s for opening up a community organisation from their household, which was known as the Nightingale Project.
And this was in Birmingham?
This was in Birmingham, so following, Windrush communities and stuff were coming over to the UK. My grandparents were pioneers in developing initiatives in the local community for those communities that were living in environments where you can imagine were hostile, quite racist, and whatnot. So it wasn't many, Caribbean communities, South Asian communities during that time frame. And there was also pioneers around the development of the Muhammad Ali Centre. Okay. So you may remember Muhammad Ali came to Birmingham a number of years ago.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And he came to my grandmother's house and had some tea. To hear stuff like that, growing up. I have no idea whatnot. But when they talk about this stuff, I guess when you were growing up, you just... Yeah. Muhammad Ali, it doesn't actually mean anything. I think now I've got older and I've reflected, well, how have I arrived here? People always say to me, how did you get to what you are now? So I would say that's been part of my DNA.
Okay.
But I've always I didn't want to do anything to do with youth work and community work. So interesting enough, when I first left school, I was trying to be an athlete. So I was training to be a basketball player. And I remember my dad always saying to me, you need to have a plan A and plan B. What happens if you don't make it? And whilst I was playing for 2 Birmingham teams at the time, for those that are watching this, you may know the old school Birmingham Bullets as well as Birmingham Excel. They were our 2 main teams for Birmingham, and I played for both. And the coach that was our coach at that time, he had an organisation called TBA, which was the Basketball Alliance. So during holiday periods, 6 weeks holidays, half terms, Easters, whatever, we would do activities for young people in youth and community centres. So I would say that was kind of the beginning of my youth work even though I didn't understand it to be youth work at that time. I only did it for money at the time. It was just, I needed some money, and that was the thing to be. And then I think years following that, I started to develop my ambition of wanting to become a professional basketball player. I had ambitions of going to America and playing at college. And then I had an injury.
Was it your ACL?
This is your
ACL. It's always the ACL, isn't it?
Is this 2000s? I don't want to. Yeah, 2000s.
Yeah, so early 2000.
I'm glad I didn't say 90s.
2000s. Yeah, I had the injury. Completely took me out of the sport.
Of course, yeah.
And then I remembered what my dad said.
Yeah.
Have a plan B. I never had a plan B because I messed about at college. Our mindset was as long as we were doing good at basketball, they kind of didn't really pressure us in terms of the academic side.
That's a very American. Your schooling was in the UK, just to get that.
All in the UK.
But that's a very American way of thinking, because you see all these athletes in America, they get their scholarships to go to college or whatever it is. So as long as your football's great, your basketball's great or whatever it is, you're good for that scholarship.
Unless you're in Coach Carter.
Yeah.
Oh, but So, but it's a very American way of thinking. I didn't know that would have translated.
Yeah, I would say I would probably argue and say in America there's more strict ideas about if you're not doing what you're doing in the classroom, because you look at your LeBron James and all them like have their degrees. I would say more so here. I only can talk for the college that I went to.
Of course,
they was very happy that we were winning all of these awards, and as long as we were winning the awards and we were known to be the best team in the West Midlands, the academic side wasn't really what there was pressuring us about. So I kind of found myself just kind of flippantly going through college and going through the motions. So when the injury happened, my dad was like, so what are you going to do now? And I was like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I actually remember that was being probably my depressed moment in my teenage years. Because now it's like you play basketball from Monday to Friday. Saturday you're away playing games. Sunday's the only day to chill to nothing.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then it's like, now what do I do now? And then I'm watching my friends now talking about going to America, talking about going to Europe to play for teams. And I'm just like, what am I supposed to do with my life?
So it's like having no purpose, no direction. Is that what you'd classify it as?
And I thought that was kind of the kind of, depressive state that I was in. And then my dad had a friend, family friend, and he worked at a place called the Information Centre. So where Birmingham Library is, well, not old library. When you used to walk up the steps, there used to be a little information shop that was funded by the Youth Service and Connections. And they had 3 youth workers in there. So I used to go in there with my friends and my cousin from time to time. And they always had a reason to be in there. I was just kind of tagging along. And through conversations, you develop relationships and whatnot. And one of them said to me, you'd be a good youth worker. You've got traits of a youth worker with the things that you're talking about. And I was just like, I'm not really trying to do youth work. I mean, I know I do the thing with sport, with children, young people in schools during holiday periods. But so we were talking, and they were telling me about what it means to be a youth worker, and then obviously they told me how much youth workers got paid, and I was like, okay, now we're talking.
I was like, I'll be a youth worker. Where do I sign? Where do I sign?
Wait, sorry, I thought it was the opposite. I thought, because I was gonna go with this, NBA player making millions, youth worker. I thought youth workers were not hugely paid.
Not now. But the days when we ain't got to recession yet.
Right, okay.
Yeah, we're following the journey now, right?
Okay.
So these are the days when youth work had money.
Right. Okay.
And, people were...
The government, dare I say, was investing in those
so when there was that investment, for someone that was quite young and, starting at a 28 grand job straight at university sounds good.
Yeah.
So it sounds really good, compared to the salaries that people are making right now. So, interesting enough, they said to me that there was a course in the local community that I was supposed to attend. And interestingly, I remember not wanting to go because it was in a postcode area outside of where I grew up.
Okay.
So interesting enough, I never had a problem with no one, never had a beef with anyone before. But the kind of story that I was always told is that you don't go there because that's where the enemy is. So as children, you kind of develop this fear
it's a tribal
people
thing as well,
that you don't even know, that you've never necessarily met before. But anyways, some convincing, I managed to go to this place and never had any issues. Loved the course, loved the program, and it was like, what was next? And then I done another program at another youth centre.
And these were a few weeks long at a time?
Yeah, so like 6 weeks or one day a week for 6 till 8. And then you get a certificate, introduction to youth work, introduction to working with children and young people. and kind of started to develop this kind of new passion, for wanting to work with young people. And then they would tell me that the things I was doing with the young people, or the younger children, when I was doing the sporting, some of those skills were actually quite transferable and actually youth work skills.
Okay.
So I realized I had a wealth of knowledge going into the session because I was doing youth work. I just didn't recognize it to be youth work. So fast forward, as I said, dealing with the injury, all my boys now are signed to go to places around the world. They said to me, why don't you think about going to university? But what it means now is that your last year of college, you're going to need to pay attention. You're going to need to get a specific type of grade.
Was this, if you don't mind me asking, like late teens, early 20s? Or?
Yeah, so I'm going early 20s.
You're into
now.
early
So
20s
so just to kind of go back a little bit, I messed about at secondary school. So I left school with no GCSEs. Well, I had a couple of GCSEs, but not relevant to courses that I necessarily wanted to do.
Of course.
So I ended up spending 4 years in college to get to that point, compared to a lot of my friends that left school, went straight into college. So I was always the oldest one in the class. So I remember I used to always get frustrated because the jokes that, even though 2 years difference, the jokes that they used to make.
It's the language. I even notice it now. So I'm in my mid-20s now and I look at a 21-year-old.
Yeah, but you look better old, so.
Fair enough.
Sorry, bro.
He doesn't look that old.
I don't look that old.
He doesn't look that old.
So yeah, so when I was convinced to potentially do my degree in youth work by these brilliant youth workers, so Yasmin, Christine, or Wezai, if you're watching this, I always got to give you guys a shout out.
Very nice.
And they wrote my university application. I always say to people, I've never wrote a university application until I wrote my master's degree one. And I had that privilege of youth workers doing that job for me.
Yeah.
So we sent off the application. We went to De Montfort University as well as Derby University. Went to Derby University, had a meeting, conversation with them, and I think they enjoyed what I was saying. I showed them, do you remember the purple record of achievement?
Yeah, I remember that.
So basically in the UK...
You don't.
Because you're old.
Yeah,
I'm born and bred.
80s, 90s babies will understand that. So we were all given this purple book. It was like a folder, a nice, pretty book. And anything that you've achieved, that was kind of like a building of old school CVs.
Okay.
Yeah, so you show people, listen, this is what the courses I've done. Gives people an idea about things that you've been exposed to. So in my last year of college, which links to the point I'm going to make in a moment, I didn't attend a lot of college because I was juggling college and also doing other one-day, half-day courses. Because I realized that I don't have no GCSEs. The grade that I'm going to have, because I messed about so much in my first year at college or my other 2 years, it's not going to give me the grade that I want. So what I thought was building up my skills in other areas. So anytime I go for an interview, I can say, well, I might not necessarily have the grade, but I've got all of these skills and I've done all of this training to put me up to that particular level. So when I went to Derby University, showed them my record of achievement. I could see them looking at my grade on the table, the record of achievement, and think, okay, well, you've been busy the last 12 months.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, I've been doing stuff. And anyway, convinced them that I was going to do some brilliant stuff in the course, and they gave me a conditional offer. I had to write an assignment so they could see my writing ability. So when I made my way back to Birmingham, I realised I lost my record of achievement.
Oh, no. Is that? Oh, my God.
So then when I had my second interview...
You're like, I swear I did it. I swear I did it.
Yeah. So I was on that vibe. I swear that I did it. But anyway, quite a long story short, De Montfort University also gave me a conditional offer.
That's good.
And then I made my decision that I wanted to go to De Montfort University. So
Where's De Montfort University?
Leicester. So moved to Leicester. Very new world for myself. First year was a bit shaky.
Were you living, if you don't mind me asking, you living by yourself?
I lived on campus.
In
I
halls
lived
with
on
a bunch
campus.
of
I
other
lived in
brothers,
halls with. So that was a whole new weird, thing. I didn't know people's on hygiene and simple things of like, this is my butter.
This is
my butter.
This is my butter.
And, stuff like that. You just
was it a drinking bottle or another bottle?
It was. I seen behaviours that I didn't know existed, and it's mad that you think that you're so in tune with the world, you actually realise that when alcohol and stuff get into human beings, what it makes people do. So that was a new reality for me, and I would say that old habits come back of creeping up. when you're trying to do something. So I found myself being very much how I used to be in college, coming late. Remember, I only live 5 minutes up the road, but I'm waking up at 8:25 to get there for 9 o'clock, and then it's just
I think that's waking up early.
So, but,
From my uni days.
but these are the things that I found myself doing, and then I also started to come back to and from Birmingham to Leicester, and then when I got into my second year, I met a man, Dr. Carlton Howson he is now, but at the time he was just Carlton Howson, and he was one of the lecturers on the BA program in youth work, and he challenged me one time and he said that you're a hypocrite, and you can imagine I was. I'm a big lad. I've always been a big lad, and this was a small lad telling me that I'm a hypocrite, and I didn't like it. But what he was saying was, what type of youth worker are you trying to be? You know, you can't be this person that outside of being here in this institution that you're trying to be the best person that you can be, but outside of this institution you're hanging around with these people and you're doing things that you're not supposed to be doing and whatnot. And he made a valid point, and I had to kind of audit my circle. I had to start to audit the people that I was around, the people that I was engaging with. So when I got into the second half of my second year, I made it my duty to really understand what this man was. Now, he's probably the most articulate black man at the time that I've ever met, because also that's a stereotype that when we grow up in our communities and our environments, we're not used to seeing black and Asian males in university teaching at that level. Yeah. You only know that if you've been exposed to it. You got to bear in mind the media only depict us as one thing. You know, unless we're playing cricket, we're playing basketball, we're doing football. We're not in business. We're not in education. We're not in healthcare. So all of these stereotypes that you see in your environment, you may have one black teacher at school, but you've never seen a professor before. And I say this to black and Asian kids before. When have you ever seen a black professor? Have you seen a female professor before? And you realize that people have never been exposed to these things. So for me, that was a big thing for me to see a black man in academia. I don't think he talks like me, but he's very articulate. So I became kind of like the teacher's pet. And every lunchtime, I was just like, where's this Carlton guy? I want to sit down and I want to understand what he's saying, have lunch with him. And people would be like, you're weird. You know, you hang around with this guy and he's a bit older than you. He's way older than you and stuff. But by I got into the third year, I found my true self. And then I knew that my mission from that particular point was to better understand young people that come from the environments that I lived in but happened to make the wrong decision. So when I finished my degree, and I have to say, when I graduated, I remember my mum crying. And it was a weird one for me because throughout all my school years, I remember my mum crying for the bad things that I've done. And for the first time, she cried because I'd done something good. So
if I've done something bad, what are you crying?
That was a weird one for me. And it's weird because, you know, always, because I've come from a household, my parents have always been in education. I've got family members that have community activists, talking OBs, MBs in my family. I told you my family history. So the question is, why are you messing about at school? Most intelligent. And I think most of it is because I felt that no one didn't understand me. I felt that people were so judgmental of me. I was always labelled aggressive, big.
Was that from within your own? Was that from within your own community as well, or was it mainly
within the education system?
In the education.
So when I was in the education system, I realised quite quickly that the people that were in the education system didn't really care for people that looked like me.
So it was the stereotypical young black
thing,
man, essentially.
And the confusion between passion and aggression. Yeah. You know, and those words that will articulate, you know, someone saying, oh, you know, you're really big and intimidating. I can't help that I'm big. You know, you see people say things like that and they pull it in a sentence and ignore the fact that that actually means something else to people that look like me. So when I finished my degree, also on a run-up to finishing my degree, I remember seeing an ad within the Birmingham Mail. Well, it was called the Evening Mail before it became the Birmingham Mail. And I remember seeing an ad for a senior youth worker in a local youth centre in an area called Handsworth.
I was born in Handsworth.
So Oaklands.
Yeah, I was born in Handsworth.
Oaklands.
Well,
on Soho Road.
The ends brought me at heart.
On Soho Road. And I used to see it for weeks thinking, how come no one ain't applying for this job? So I applied for it, and I remember going through the interview, and I remember actually seeing the same youth workers that put me on the training courses many years back.
Okay.
So I'm thinking, there's no way I'm going to get this job. You know, I'm talking about the people that put me on a youth work program are against me in the interview. But, got it.
Student has become the master.
Student became the master. Got the job. But, so when I landed at the youth centre, I never forget, there was a guy that used to do Carnival and Arts, Professor Black, that's watching this, pum pum. And he said, he went, he said, good luck.
Yeah.
He's telling me about staff that had left the building, staff that left on stress, young people attacking. I was thinking, this is why nobody was. So something locally people knew about the building, but it's something that I didn't know.
So is this then, you know, where it all started? Where it all started for you, where you became passionate about youth work. You were looking at.
I say the passion was already there. I just think that I felt like somebody needed to ignite.
So it was
fire.
it was a spark, and then someone just came and
poured
poured fuel all over it, and that's it. That's when it started.
And I would say that was where my youth work started. You know, in that building in Oakland Youth Centre.
And where was your work a lot to do with disadvantaged youth?
Predominantly disadvantaged young people that would come, and not always disadvantaged, young people that were socially included, but also getting caught up in what I call the cycle, violence, gangs,
Were these predominantly ethnic minorities?
Yeah, predominantly. I mean, you'd have a few Irish families that were in the community. You had a few, you know, because you also got to bear in mind as well what I call the cycle of communities that were coming as well. So in the beginning, it was predominantly, you know, Sikh, Pakistani. Then it was Caribbean communities that were coming in. You see a few Irish coming with the Caribbean community, and then we started to see more like the Romanian kids that is starting on the Somali kids. So depending on what was going on in the world at the time, and where poor people, immigrants were being dumped, were also the places where the young people started to attend those centres.
So it's pretty interesting that you said a lot of them were either from disadvantaged backgrounds or they were socially included, but they were still involved in this crew. I mean, you've just told us your family history, and if I may say, it's you seem to come from a very educated family, a very a socially included family, if that's the right term to use. So when you say if you don't mind me asking, you messed around that college, was it? Again, the typical, you mentioned gangs and all of that. Was that what you would classify as messing around that you got involved in? And was your passion?
What you're trying to say is have you shanked anyone? That's what you're trying to say.
No, come on.
I'm
straight with the question. I'm a bit more.
City to city is slightly different. So where I was when we were growing up, we didn't have to be in gangs. That's the difference between young people of yesterday and young people today. So what we had was individuals that lived in our community that were associated or involved in gangs. So, for example, you know, Birmingham was always known for Burger Bar and the Johnson, so the area that I lived was Burger Bar territory. So when I was going to school, if you jumped on a school bus and had a problem with me, I would just say that I know Mustafa, and because you know who Mustafa is, you don't want a problem with me. Okay. That's the difference between yesterday and today. So now you say that to a young person, no, I don't care who Mustafa is.
Yeah,
means nothing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, they don't really care.
So we didn't need to. That's a key aspect of where the culture's moving now.
But were you dragged into that? I mean, it's a different life. It's a different life, obviously.
Not necessarily. So we was exposed to it, meaning living in the environment. We've seen next door neighbours involved in some of the national stories that have happened over the last 15 years. So we knew those individuals, we knew their houses, we knew their parents, we knew their brothers and sisters, but we didn't have to. That's the difference.
Yeah.
So being exposed to, you know, seeing people get attacked, seeing people getting shot at, seeing people getting stabbed was normal in the environment, but we didn't need to. For those that wanted to, may have been a series of factors. So I lived in my household, and I remember in my house, and I think there was about 3 or 4 houses in the little cul-de-sac that I lived, were the only households that had a mum and dad. So I think about that in future now in terms of my research and think, well, was that variable of having a dad in my household maybe one of the reasons why I didn't?
That's very interesting you bring that up, because I was having a conversation with Raqib about it just coming in, and you know, and it's been in the radio a lot with all the stabbings in London and all of that. And then it's always a middle-aged, middle-class white man talking about it. Ooh, they have absentee fathers and whatever it is. But it's very interesting that someone from your background as well has sort of acknowledged it. Do you think it's genuinely a problem? It's the fact that... So the take I have on it is a lot of people that are getting involved in gangs and all of this, or maybe... looking up to Tony down the road, who's part of a gang, is because maybe they don't have that male role model or whatever it is. Do you think that is genuinely a factor?
It's one aspect to it, but not the only aspect. And the only reason why I say that is you got to look at it from a different perspective. So it's not necessarily about the role model. It's also about the needs that are not being met by those young people in the environment, 100%. Which is not one. And the way that we look at issues, we only look at it as one. So we say the reason why young people are in gangs because they don't have a positive role model.
Yeah, very one-dimensional, isn't it?
Yeah.
A lot of those individuals have uncles, have older brothers. So that's not the only reason. But when young people are being socialized in a particular environment by particular individuals that reflect a wider demographic and also reflect a wider culture of violence in society. So we can't talk about gangs in the community and ignore films and ignore games and multi-billion-dollar companies that profit off showing us things like Narcos and showing us things like Netflix that talk about gangs and violence.
It glamorizes it.
And then talk about the one man that's standing on the corner that happens to reflect the wider, deeper society.
I guess the question with that is that, for example, Top Boy, right, which is London based,
yes,
and talks about East London gang violence. It's one of those where a lot of people celebrate that because it's got all the leading actors are black people, and that's something that's a little bit rare, especially on a big time show.
Yes,
but on the other side, and so it's someone that you can relate to, but actually pretty much all of them are in negative roles, and they do try to humanize it a bit.
I think it's more to do with representing the so-called culture, isn't it?
I think there's a number of elements you can kind of look at. That is, I think the representation element, I think from both director and those of acting, is big in terms of the community, because how often do we have the space and the opportunity to do things at such a big scale? That's one. When we talk about depicting negative roles, I took something completely different. I think that was excellent in the way that they showed the true stories of what happens to people within the city.
In that life, yeah.
Not all young people wake up one morning and want to be gang members. It's a process. And I think the brilliant things that they showed was things like trauma. They showed things like fear. They showed things like, how do you detach yourself from living on an estate where everybody kind of has the same type of culture, and how do you detach yourself from wanting to just go to school? And I think it was brilliant in terms of capturing that, in terms of that. I mean, if the focus happens to be violence, I think we need to have a reality check. Go to the local community. It's violence. Young people are shooting, stabbing, and they're doing all kind of madness. So when sometimes we always hear of, somebody depicting that on a screen, I understand this idea of, but it's violent. But unfortunately, I've also said as well the capitalist society that also profit, because what they don't want is for you to do a nice story. So young people also know as well that sells.
Because it's very interesting, because I forgot the name of the movie, you probably remember it, the name of the movie. Blue Story, that's exactly what I was going to touch on, where I think it happened, two gangs, was it in Birmingham, I think they clashed, two gangs clashed in the cinema.
That's what the media said.
I don't know exactly, that's just what I heard on the radio. And then they banned it, and then they
and it had nothing to do with the film. It was Ice Age. People was lining up outside of.
Yeah, exactly.
But this is what I'm saying, that when these things happen, they use the scapegoat.
Exactly.
In order to say, because of the film, that's the reason why young people are violent. But in reality, those young people had knives and were in that building.
Anyway. I think these movies, the show like Top Boy, for example, and the Blue Story, I've not seen Blue Story, but I think they're critiques of the culture in some extent. With Top Boy, from the first season, when it got rebooted, and the second season, it became much more of a critique, because the first time it was celebrating the culture quite a bit, and then you start seeing downfall. Characters start dying in the masses, and it's not something that you'd say that it's kind of glamorizing the culture.
No, of course.
And I think when we watch these things, and I think this is the difference between adult and youth, that we watch these things as adults and we critique negativity and think, see, it's glamorizing the culture. When there's actually scenes that I even use in my sessions with young people. Perfect example, the county lines thing. I call it the big illusion in my work. So young people are shown Rolexes and nice cars and whatever.
So if you don't mind, explain
so
what county lines
is this kind of new phenomena where young people are being basically human trafficked up and down the country by organised criminals in order to sell Class A substances.
And they're staying there months at a time, aren't they?
Yes.
So they're away from their
you may see someone just literally messaged me. That's what I was messaging before we started. A young boy, young girl goes missing for 2 days. Nobody don't know where they are. And sometimes, not in all situations, those young people are staying in a crack house, oftentimes selling for another dealer that may not be there, and making money, and then they bring that back.
We see it in Top Boy.
But that's why I said Top Boy is good for an education perspective, because what it shows is the reality of what happens around county lines. Because what it didn't show when they give the big illusion, they don't talk about the kids that have to go on trains on their own that sometimes never travelled anywhere before. They showed how them kids were petrified. There was adults that these kids were around.
And the kids, I mean, again, I take it back to Top Boy. The kid that, I think...
That were on the trainer too.
That were on the train too.
Go to Manchester.
It's because his mum had the problem with immigration, mental health.
Yes.
She couldn't put food on the table. Her benefits were cut, all of that stuff. So naturally it forces...
Spoilers, bro.
Spoiler alert.
I mean, he's not watching it yet.
I've watched it. I'm just saying, not everyone's watched it.
Everyone, it was that such of a big scene
Yeah.
for the UK.
Yeah, exactly.
Everyone should have watched it. Now,
Exactly. If you haven't, it's
from
your
an
fault.
educational perspective, I think it's definitely good, and that's why I'm saying that there's gems that we can use for me that we can show young people this is the reality. You know, because they're given this illusion by people that exploit them that it's easy. You're just going to go to a house, you just hold a bag, you sell a few drugs, you make loads of money, and that's it. What I don't tell them about is fear and danger. You may be around individuals that are mentally ill. You may be around adults that demand that they want more. They may have individuals that say they don't have enough money for the drugs, but they still want it. You've got other issues around police possibly raiding a property. You've got issues around other gangs and criminals in the local area that may raid the property that you are. So children are being put in these environments, not being told about the bigger story, but just told that you're going to get a Rolex watch at the end of it. And I think this is where these films give us the inkling of what's going on. And we actually can learn from these younger guys that are doing these things in order to do that. I would argue in terms of the critique that we're talking about is phase 2 would be, now that you have the platform, then you introduce some of those aspects of talking about positivity and things that communicate or can be communicated within the local community. But unfortunately, they're competing with a market that says we want violence. So if we can tally in a story that is, one, educational, but two, also talks about the reality of what really happens with children and young people, I think as the adults, we shouldn't just critique them so much and allow these young brothers to see what they do next. And if it becomes a pattern of that's all they do, then we can be fair, but we can't just shoot them with the first thing that they've done. And I think as adults, that's what we do. And when you look at every facet of society, we do it in school, we do it in education. A young person that does something that's a little bit radical and rebellious, you shouldn't be doing that because it's promoting that. And then young people, you wonder why they say.
So when you talk about school system, and I think you touched upon it in your own background, is that you felt kind of that the school system was not for you, or it was just labeling you and pushing you aside. And
most schools are institutionally racist.
So what do we do in the UK systematically to tackle that and challenge it?
I think one of the things is understanding what the system is. You know, before we talk about tackling things, I think that is also a programming that we have within the Western Hemisphere. We want to tackle something, but we don't understand. And if I said, what is racism and how does systemic racism work, everyone's going to be like, I don't know what you're talking about.
So what makes you think schools are institutions? I mean, look, I understand I'm a white guy. I'm a male, I'm a white guy. Until they know my name is Mustafa, they treat me like every other white guy out there. So excuse my ignorance, of course. But what makes you say?
Excuse my ignorance.
What makes you say schools are institutionally racist?
Because of the way in which the school system is created, and how it impacts individuals from different types of groups, that creates a particular hierarchy and a deficit of individuals that enter into the educational system and don't see themselves and how they navigate. So I'll give you some clean and perfect examples. So when I go into an education system, the vast majority of the people that work in this education system are white and middle class. They do not come from my background. They drive to work and drive far away from work. Whereas
so they drive from Solihull into inner Birmingham.
When I leave school, I walk home.
Exactly.
So school and home is not too far. So if you've got middle class people that don't understand the culture and the people, that are parachuted into these institutions with just a teaching qualification, that don't understand the culture and so on and so forth, how are you going to understand me? So if you're shouting at me in terms of authority, and I've been taught in my community that when an elder speaks to me, I look down of shame, and your understanding is that you must look at me when I'm speaking to you, already there's a conflict. Already if you're a woman that works in that particular environment, and I'm a big lad, and I'm talking to you with passion, I'm afraid, because the social context that teaches you that men that are big like me, that somehow are aggressive and are sexual predators, and all of these things that we ultimately hear. So we can't ignore the fact that these happens within institutions. And then there's also another thing as well, in terms of the education itself. So we're talking about science, math, we're talking about geography and history. And in all of those particular subjects, it's taught from a white Eurocentric perspective. It's all German. It's all Italian. It's all Greek. So if I'm learning about ancient Rome and ancient Greece, I'm sorry, but the ancient Egyptians preceded them 10,000 years prior to them coming. The Greeks were students of the Egyptians. The Egyptians were African civilizations. So if you're telling me about Greeks and Romans and you ain't telling me about Imhotep III, what are you talking about? And these are the things that oftentimes get projected in the system. We talk about history, Black History Month. Oh, we're going to do Black History Month in October. But you're teaching me about Martin Luther King. You're teaching me about Rosa Parks. Brilliant people in terms of activists, in terms of getting rights. But why are you starting at the civil rights movement? Why are we not talking about the different empires in Mali, in Songhai, in Western Africa, in Southern Africa, thousands of years and hundreds of years before the civil rights movement? We didn't start in slavery. So you're teaching an education that actually is inferior, because what you're teaching me is that you were begging. You always started as slaves, or even Muslims.
There was no history behind it.
We start with Bilal. Bilal wasn't the only African companion. But if you don't know about your history in terms of Islam, and you're only taught that there was only one companion named Bilal, there was hundreds of African. It's just that the Prophet just, in that particular time, in terms of those particular narration, just didn't feel the need that he needed to talk about all of them. But there's so many in terms of the literature of individuals that came from different tribes. Loads of the Arab tribes were African, but we're only told about Bilal. You see my point? So the education is given to us that is inferior education. But when you're talking about King Henry VIII, and you're talking about all these other brilliant Romans, Greeks and whatnot, you're giving me a history that tells me subconsciously
you're
that
inferior.
I was just a slave. And all I was an individual, or we were individuals that one day said, we don't like the way that people are treating us, and we sat on the bus. And we walked and we held each other's hand, but didn't teach us about the philosophy of Malcolm X, didn't teach us the philosophy of Marcus Mosiah Garvey, and that was talking about call to action. No, it's about revolution, holding hands. There needs to be a counter response to that. And when you're not given that type of philosophy inside of the education system, and you're only given a white European-centric education, you can understand why when I got to year 8 and 9, class is boring. Because it doesn't reflect me.
And sorry, go on.
No. I was gonna just say, I was trying to move it on to then. You obviously do a lot of research, you do a lot of youth work. So I was gonna start talking about the solutions. What do you think the way forward is? But I think if you still want to just chime in on the points that he was on, and then maybe we can move later on to the.
It's very fun. We've never done it like this. We just interrupt each other. Asad and I have no manners, basically. Sorry, what I was going to say was about Muslim history. So you touched upon kind of, even Muslims do this. We only talk about Bilal, and we ignore 8 other African companions, but also big contributions that African scholars had. And even when we start talking about Africa,
concept of Europe.
Yeah. Or when we talk about African scholars, we usually talk about, this African scholar was taken as a slave away to South America. It's like, okay, what was he doing before then? And what about the generations of people before then in the libraries in Mali and things like that? And I think that would, do you think that would cause, so, we talk about racism in the Muslim community as a big problem. And a lot of people just, kind of throw that back and be like, no, we've got Bilal, problem solved. And do you think the fact that a lot of Asian communities are colonized it means that the way we're taught history, as in like South Asians are taught history, is also very Eurocentric?
Yeah, most definitely. And I think that is the part of the problem. So when we're talking about, just to conclude with the point about racism, which attached to your question, racism is a system. It's not just this belief that I don't like you because you're black or you're Asian or whatever. It's a system. And that system is linked to power. And when you start to understand racism to be a system, and you know how then it functions in all facets of society, whether that be education, entertainment, housing, whether that be healthcare, whether that be law, politics, then you start to know how it works within an education system. So it's not that people are walking around saying that you're an Asian this, or you're a black this, or you're a black that, but the understanding, the policies and the implementation of those policies that also exist within the institution puts me at a default already. Because if I'm a person that's a kinesthetic learner, and I learn from I learn in loads of different types of ways, and you teach me and you show me how to learn, but your education system is Eurocentric in it and it's very formal, that I stand in front of a classroom in terms of a blackboard and I talk and you don't ask no questions, you're leaving people in the room.
100%.
So if I'm a person that's the way that I interact because I'm a dynamic person, I've already switched off.
But then if I'm going to play devil's advocate here. I always do that. They know me. I put forth the most controversial views. You talk about we've spoken about Asians, we've spoken about the young black men, we've spoken about Arabs and whatever. But what about? So my challenge to you is it about race or is it about social class? Because we see disadvantaged young white boys or young white boys or girls, and that's a lot. For example, this is what the rise in the far right movement now is throwing in our faces. That's why you see, dare I say it, what has fueled Brexit and what has fueled the rise in this rhetoric is you've got disadvantaged white men and women who feel left out from community. So will it be too far a stretch to include them in this cycle of disadvantage that we're talking about?
And I think that is. Just to respond back to you, advocate, it's a Eurocentric question that you've just asked me.
Of course.
Because what you've done is the typical Karl Marx response of that we have two different groups of people. You've got the rich people, the wealthy, the educated, and you've got everybody that's in this one particular place that is also coming from poor socioeconomic backgrounds, of which there's also black and white males. And I'm going to say, to some extent, you're right, because just like in the education system, it's not just African Caribbean children failing in the education system, it's also white working class, because they're failing just as bad in the education system. So we can say, well, race and class, is it race or is it class or whatnot? What I would also argue is a concept called black Marxism, because what you've given me is a Eurocentric idea and that you haven't said it. So I'm going to talk about black Marxism, and black Marxism will say, to an extent, maybe there is two categories within society that say, well, you've got the rich, the wealthy and educated, and you've got the second class that happen to be poor, come from backgrounds. However, if I'm coming from a disadvantaged background and I happen to be a young black male and living next to a white man that is also coming from the same background, we go to the same school, go through the same experiences, we've both been kicked out of school, we've both not done so well. However, I'm still 9 times more likely to be stopped and searched by the police. I'm still 8 times more likely to be sectioned under the Mental Health Act. I'm still 7 times more likely to be given harsher drugs, me compared to you. I'm still, when we look at all of the statistics in the reports that demonstrate, well, it is about race as well. It's not just about our class.
I think with
the position that a lot of those individuals take is, well, there's white working class people going through problems, and they are, and they'd be ignorant to say that now because the statistics demonstrate that. However, when we're talking about race, those that are from black and ethnic minority groups are at the bottom of the food chain. And we look at that in terms of different types of statistics in representation, and also the disparity between individuals from these particular groups in the education system. When we look at healthcare, we look at mental health services, criminal justice system, and so on and so forth.
I think there is inherent privilege in being white. It doesn't have to be in the school system where or economically as well. I think when you walk down the street and the way someone treats you can...
No, definitely.
Yeah, 100%.
I notice it with Uber drivers. For Uber drivers, like I said at the beginning, I'm a white guy just by looking at me. Until they found out my name's Mustafa, they don't, they treat me like any other Tom, Dick, or Harry on the street. And you definitely notice that. You definitely notice how privileged you are. I talk about myself, for example, at work when I'm a pharmacist, so I deal with people on a daily basis. I probably speak to about 200-300 people a day. So when someone comes in and I have a member of staff come out who's a Pakistani man, who's brown, with a beard, and the way they speak to him, and I'll come out and I'll say the exact same information, and they'll take it from me, but they won't take it from him, and it's always Jill or Tony or whatever it is.
Tony?
So you do see it. So it's definitely.
But is it a little bit of, so? I mean, I see that. Obviously there's a bit of ghettoization in the UK, which is structural. For example, the council map of Solihull and Birmingham was redrawn, I think, in the 90s, which meant that actually some of those seats became safer in different parties' hands. And actually, Solihull until recently was almost completely white, and even now it tends to be a predominantly white area. But you do see in some areas. So, for example, I go hiking sometimes in Worcester. And I'll see, for example, like 90% of the people there are white, and one of them is, well, why aren't brown people coming out and doing and kind of seem to assimilating more? Because a lot of people, and again, my experience is more with the Muslim community, so a lot of people they want to be in, like, a lot of Muslims will live in Small Heath because they're like, I want to be here, I don't want to be in, and like, I go hiking and
they're
people are like,
safer in certain communities,
Yeah,
100%.
And I think that links to the wider context in which I'm talking about when we're talking about the system of racism, because that's how it operates. You have some groups within society that feel isolated, silent, or invisible. So the easiest thing to do in order for me to keep safe is to stay in spaces in which I'm going to have that safety.
And
it's a basic
humans are tribal.
human needs.
Humans are tribal by our own instinct.
So I'm going to go where affinity is, and we also have to be honest as well. In a country that is predominantly white, the narrative is that we don't want you to we don't want you to be involved in our things anyway. So they tell us about assimilation, and I say us meaning those of black and ethnic minority groups. So they tell us we need to include, but they don't want to include us in their environments anyway. So that might help us to understand that, yeah, you might go somewhere like Solihull, and yes, there's loads of opportunities for different groups, but if I attend that particular group, how am I going to feel? I've, moved out of my area and because I've got a nice job and, my children are there, but why is it that when I go places with my family, I feel this energy of you don't belong here? So I'd rather go back to the ends where all my family and friends are and go back to Sar Road and chill with all my people. And you'd be like, yeah, but why would you want to come here? And there's loads of stuff to do over there. It's not the fact that there's not access to the opportunity. It's when I arrive there, how am I going to feel? If I don't feel included, and that same feeling is the same feeling that I felt when I was in school. So when individuals talk about racism and how racism operates, that's how it operates, because there's things called microaggressions, and these things also operate within the system where, again, people are not walking around saying, I don't like you because whatever you are, but that feeling, the way I talk, the way I look, the way that people behave, and all of those particular behaviors are an aspect of this thing that we call racism, white supremacy.
I think that draws back to the idea of home. So one of the episodes we did on home was that, can we really feel at home in the UK when we feel so much aggression from the majority? And that's the idea when you come to Solihull, for example. If you're a minority ethnic person, then you will be met with certain types of aggression or certain types of kind of prejudice, and you won't feel safe there, so you can never make that your home. That's why you have communities in the UK that are just fixed there, and generations pass, and the kids are still there.
Definitely.
Well, I guess. Sorry, go on.
No.
So one of the things about that I was thinking about was, I have a lot of friends who have inherited land from their parents, and I think, because it can't come. It's a little.
Sorry, they've inherited land here in
yeah. So like, or big houses or whatever. So wealth, because a lot of it is actually when you look at. I mean, even moving away from Solihull in other cities, for example, in Manchester, like Altrincham or something, there tend to be Muslims who are richer move there, and oftentimes it's second or third gen have become dentists and doctors and all of that. And actually, we're limited a little bit because we're an immigrant community, that we don't have generational wealth in this country. A lot of people who came here left everything behind when they came. And this happened, I mean, in post-partition, India-Pakistan, a lot of Pakistanis ended up losing everything because they ran across. Happened on the other side as well, but I'm just being from my... So there's a kind of a mix of or intersectionality, to use the, I believe that's the correct term, to the mix of race and class coming together, is that as largely immigrant communities, we tend to be on the poor end of the spectrum, and then we get disadvantaged further because we're 9 times more likely to get this and that.
Yes.
So I guess my point from that was how do you see that moving forward, especially when the challenges are further and further, and then I think with the recent Tory government, it's getting a lot harder. I think we mentioned that right at the start, that money's gone out of youth work. So,
which is interesting because you mentioned connections at the beginning.
Yes,
I remember connections in my school. We used to, we had a career advisor, and we'd go in there, and I think when we were in year 11 or year 10, they'd book you in to decide what you want for your A levels or whatever it is. But now, I mean, I haven't been into a school since I left.
Unless you've got,
but I don't see the connection branding.
Got teachers and people that are in tune with, some schools are very proactive in ensuring that young people know what to do next.
So so my argument, I think this sort of naturally brings us on to, we've spoken about all the the doom and gloom and what the reality is. So do you see it moving forward? Like, especially for youth, especially for people like us. I mean, for example, the Black British generation, they came over in much earlier than the Muslim generation.
Yes.
So you are sort of generations ahead of us in terms of everything. So what would you see?
When you say us, you're a white guy, so
Muslims. I'm a British Muslim. I'm a British Muslim.
Loads of black people that came on Muslim too.
Yeah, exactly. So what do you see as the way forward? How do things improve from here? How can we, for example, in our respective organisations, what can we do?
It's the fundamentals, the things like economics, things like politics, and our peoples need to be more aware of those things, and need to look at any community that mobilise themselves to a particular point. You notice that they're involved in things like business and economics and things like that because they understand wealth also has a role to play in terms of the legacy and sustainability and the heartbeat of any community. Mm-hmm. But I want to put something also further as well, because you mentioned a point about, well, not just only Muslims, but Asian communities coming after. Mm-hmm. And this is a critique that oftentimes I speak to my fellow Asian and Arab friends. Mm-hmm. Is one thing that is always discussed, and this is another elephant in the room, is that a lot of racism that may exist in the Pakistani or Muslim community as it relates to African or African Caribbean people is that this idea about being lazy. Now, we've come here and we was able to start all of our own businesses and so on and so forth. We were poor. How have you lot been here so far and haven't been able to do anything? But one thing that you haven't analysed, and I say you in a wider sense, is you haven't analysed the destruction that happened to those communities before. We're talking about intergenerational trauma. Mm-hmm. And even Jews can talk about the fact that intergenerational trauma from the Holocaust has a ripple effect on people up until this day. So you have a people that were destroyed totally, no knowledge of themselves, no name, no language, no culture, no morals, no moral compass of who they are. Yet still, they were colonizing a particular series of islands, and they were told, come to the country to build something that is called Great Britain. And then when they got here, many of them were trained and skilled up, and in order to work and help build the country, the same country made them live in hostile environments, didn't give them the same access to certain types of things, bearing in mind that trauma hasn't been dealt with. Yet, for some reason, that they was able to mobilize. We had things like, pardon, I can't remember what Asian communities call it. So it's like our own banking system. Everybody chips in at the moment of the month. And if there's a wedding or something that happens, our situation ours was called the partner. So we had solutions. So then when we got to post-industrial revolution, industrialization, and now companies we're using technology now, the workers, the hands, we didn't need them no more. We didn't need the skills no more. And that's where the white working class get involved as well, because you look in all of the areas where the white working class is, when HP Source and Land Rover and all, who's the people that get affected the most? The people that have the skills and the tools.
It's what the Tory government are now calling low-skilled workers between.
So now, when you look at a historical context, you then look at the communities that have come to the country over the last, say, 100 years or whatnot, and you look at the differences between those communities. So yes, they may have come on the perspective of poverty and had to start from scratch. But what hasn't been acknowledged is the destruction of what's happened prior to that. You can't go through over 500 years of slavery, being stripped of your knowledge of self and who you are and what you are, get thrown into an environment and just be told that, you know what, you're going to survive and you're going to do really well. And that's not to say that no other community have gone through repression, but no group in the world can tell me they've gone through westernized European colonialism. Before that, we also don't like to talk about the Arab slavery that also happened prior to the Europeans coming and being involved in that. And you got the same set of people that have that same resilience and for all over the ages are still able to be here and being able to develop and create and build a country in the same environment that still tell us that they don't want us here. And then now what do they say? Because you don't have your papers, you can do one and go back to your country. And that's the legacy of racism. That's the legacy that the wealth has been created to benefit one community that gives people that privilege by default. Doesn't necessarily mean to do with economics, but they have a privilege in society on the backs of individuals that help build their empire. So that's why when we talk about things like OB and MB and there's that discussion, should black people take an MB and an OB? Me personally, I wouldn't take one. Because the whole concept of empire is an absolute insult to my great-great-great-great-grandparents. Because through the bloodshed of that empire is how you're able to be so privileged and say, we've got all of these colleges and you got all of these nice names of Joseph Chamberlain and Matthew Bolton and all of these different people. And a lot of these individuals find out what their histories were and how they made their wealth. Yeah. And we don't have these conversations, and they were on the back of people that look like me. So then, but people then are going to tell me that I'm lazy.
Yeah, it's like Cecil Rhodes, or because I think it always strikes me as like Jinnah was up for one and he declined it. And
quite
that's
a few people have declined it.
Yeah, so hopefully when you can decline one,
So
that'll be an award by itself.
So, that'll be an award by itself. We'll give you our own version of it. We'll give you the Middle West podcast.
Just give me the Middle West podcast.
Holder of the Middle West podcast.
And my name's after it. And I'm not knocking people that don't take them as well. So those that are watching this, I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying for someone that's well read in terms of my history.
It's a personal choice.
If I was to ask my great-great-great-great-grandparents what they feel about that, for me, it'd be...
They'll call you a sellout. They'll sell out, exactly.
I think, I've been working on this for some time, since you've done gang exit strategy, and we're negotiating our exit strategy from this podcast... Nobody likes that. Okay, fair enough.
I don't get it.
I know what you're trying to say, but he's
saying that with gang members.
No,
he's trying to say we're coming to the end of the episode. How do you wrap up, basically?
So basically, my wrap-up question was going to be, and again, it's a reference to another media kind of thing, which is Man Like Mobeen. They did a new show. They were in Solihull actually. They came to the Garden Centre down here. But one of the things it talks about in that show is how hard it is for him to get out of gang life, and it seems that he's trying to live on the straight and narrow, if you will. He's trying to pull his family up, and kind of that conversation about social mobility. He's trying to move up the ladder, and basically, because one of the things you said was that people in this day and age, a lot of the time they feel like they don't have a choice other than to deal drugs, and he kind of just kind of an overview of the three C's. Like he worked himself into that, and then he keeps trying to get dragged back into it. So. One of the things that you've worked on and you're an expert on is gang exit strategy. And what does that kind of involve in terms of getting people out of there and lifting them out?
I think ultimately, again, I know I sound like very long-winded, but when I talk, I like for people to have an in-depth understanding of what I'm talking about. To understand the concept of a gang, you need to understand the concept of family. So to tell a young person, male or female, that they have to leave a gang is equivalent to telling them or telling us you've got to do your family and leave them. Because that's how in touch and how close they are. Why? Because those families, want to call them gangs or give it that label, those families meet the needs of everything that they want. So if I ain't got no money and mum can't afford that money, guess what? The family can provide that. No. If I'm at home and I'm out and about on the road and my mum and dad can't look after me, guess what? My alternative family are going to be able to provide those safety factors because I don't want to get beat up, I don't want to get robbed. So if I have to hang around with these group of boys in order to protect myself, then I'm going to join my family. I just want to be loved and I just want to belong to something, because I realize that me just being alone, one, may put me in situations where people may want to attack me, and two, you're not very popular being on your own in this society in a highly social technological era. So me being around individuals enables me to get credibility, respect, people are going to like me, so on and so forth. So when we look at the construct of the family is not the problem. The problem is violence. So that's why, going back to the earlier point, we need to understand the DNA of our society, which is violence. So I don't have a problem with gangs. I have a problem with violence. But if we're not looking at the root causes of why violence exists within our society, that's the part of the problem. So we put so much focus on making kids leave gangs, but what we're not looking at is the root cause of the environment that creates gangs to happen in the first place. So if we ain't looking at poverty, if we're not looking at deprivation, if we're not looking at poor education, if we're not talking about racism and systemic racism, if we're not talking about adverse childhood experiences, and we're not talking about the role that religion plays, media, and all of these other aspects in society, gangs will always be here. And I can look at my research and go back to the 18th and 17th century. There's always been gangs. But the issue of violence, though, can we reduce violence? So my work is more about reducing the violence. So if I'm working with a young person, my work solely is about, can they remove themselves from the violent behaviors and activities that they may be part of every single day or every now and then? And you'll realize that when you put young people on a path and a journey to remove themselves, or they tear them away from the violent aspect to it, they may not need the family. Because through those new opportunities, I don't need to chill with you like no more. Because you've given me a new opportunity now where I'm playing basketball. Yeah, I'm playing sport. So even though you guys are my family, I can see you like every now and then. But my new family is the basketball team. My new family is the cricket club. My new family is the arts club. My new family is the masjid. So when you create an alternative family, I may not need the family that is deviant, that really was supporting me in terms of making my needs. So the key thing is making sure that the needs are met. So when I talk about gangs exit, the exit is what new family can we create and what new family you can attach yourself to that don't replicate the negative aspects of the family that you're coming from.
I think that's quite a bombshell to end on, you know.
Yeah, perfect.
Make the masjid your new family.
Yeah.
But really appreciate you coming on. I think your Twitter is @RightSpeaks.
Like what?
What's your Twitter handle?
My Twitter handle is at Real Action.
At Real Action. I don't
You've
know
just
why.
plugged a random guy.
I was thinking, who's that? Then I was like, yeah.
You've just plugged a random
At
guy.
Real Action, yeah.
But if you just type my name, Craig Pinkney, in Twitter, I'll come up anyway, and then you'll see the stuff that I'm doing.
Definitely, and I think that all the work you're doing is absolutely fantastic, and it's. I mean, I just the nature of what I do and the life we lead, we don't actually get to sit with people with your knowledge and from your background and from your expertise. So it's definitely been very, very eye opening from my end, and it is definitely. I've now figured out that maybe I'm a closet Marxist, and being a Labour supporter, maybe that's in my DNA. But
that's good.
Nice.
It's better.
I'm
than,
not.
It's better than my closet identity.
Just please clarify. So it's generally made us made me personally look at things in a different way. And thanks for your time. Thanks for everything you do.
Of course, man.
It was enlightening.
You can,
really enlightening. And it was we just got taken back to school, didn't we?
Essentially.
We did. You can email us about the episode or about anything else, further guest ideas, etc. on podcast@themiddlewest.co.uk. We have a new website that will be launching very soon, themiddlewest.co.uk. You can also catch us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram @themiddlewest, PC @themiddlewest podcast. And hopefully we will catch you in another 2 weeks with another episode with another guest. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam.